Speaking of emotion and compassion in the human element, talk about paratransport cases.
If Americans knew what really goes on in the paratransit industry, they would be stunned. So basically you have the most vulnerable people, people who have disabilities, people who are elderly, who cannot take care of themselves. And they are almost, completely dependent upon others for transportation. Some paratransit companies take their jobs so seriously. We've got, some great companies around here, and they really are great at taking care of the individual. But it's shocking to see how weak the regulations are, and frankly, all the loopholes that there are. And so a lot of times you see paratransit companies that are shysters. They're operating at the lowest possible standard because they want the most profit. So the less they do in terms of safety and precaution, it tends to be the more they're going to make in profit. And so you have people who are extremely vulnerable put in situations where they're transported by people who aren't trained properly. The paratransit van or bus is not staffed adequately. It's not maintained properly, and the people are in horrible crashes because they haven't been restrained properly. Adequate protections have been put in place. And then the worst part is a lot of them can't speak for themselves, so they can't even tell you what happened. So they're tough cases.
As rough as this is going to be to hear, run me through a case. Give me an example.
Well, here's a great one. We had a case, and honestly, I didn't know what was going to happen. We had the case of this woman who was picked up in a paratransit in a van. And of course, every time we have something like that, we go to try to find video footage of the pickup. But in this particular instance, the video footage was destroyed. Now, that wasn't, I don't think that was intentional, because the building owners were responsible for the footage. I think it was just a mishap. But we couldn't get anything on the footage to see what the pickup was like. At any rate, the woman was not restrained. She was in a wheelchair inside of a van. And of course, wheelchairs with a body in it have tremendous amounts of weight, so there's tremendous momentum. The driver's driving way too fast. The driver is not trained properly, is in a hurry, because he's being pushed on his schedule to make more drives so that there can be more profit. And sure enough, he slams on his brakes, and my gosh, the poor woman, has her wheelchair go up to the front and hit, and she breaks both femurs. Well, a broken femur has not only does it bring with it tremendous pain, but if a person is older, the likelihood of surviving that is extremely small. And unfortunately, ultimately, this lady passed away. But we had to put all that back together and try to figure out how it happened. And the company wanted to claim that literally the woman just slipped out of the chair. She hadn't restrained herself. She had, they thought that she had perhaps fooled with the restraint system. None of that was true. It was a heck of a fight, and we ultimately prevailed, but I did not know what was going to happen at the end.
Describe working with a family in this case, and in, I'm sure, other cases where you're working with the family of someone lost. You're working with the survivors of a case like that, or many others. How do you handle the family, the emotions of it, the business of it? How do you balance all that?
Well, it's really tough, because typically you have several family members or you have no family members. If you have no family members, you're dealing with a personal representative or a power of attorney, somebody who's just been put in place. That's difficult. If you have several family members, they may have conflicting thoughts, conflicting goals, and all that sort of stuff, and typically you have tremendous guilt, you have tremendous anger, you have anxiety, and you have confusion. And you put all that together, and even the best families can really have problems. And you have to work through all that.
So, part legal work, part psychology,
Yes.
part business, part emotion.
Yes. Yeah, I used to have this Greek client, and the guy would always call me counselor, counselor. And, I thought, oh, well, of course we are counselors at law, but I didn't really get that. And as time has gone on, I realized, yeah, I understand what he was getting at.
In the case of the lady who died in that particular instance you cited, how did the business of it ultimately play out?
Well, so the Paratransit company ownership lied. It just lied repeatedly. But what you find over time is if people lie, the more they get trapped, because things start to contradict one another and they can't keep it all together. And ultimately, in this case, we actually found documents that were clear misrepresentations where they had tried to change statements in terms of what had happened. And so, we had to push it all the way through. I thought the case was actually going to be tried. It did not. It settled the night before. But it was literally only after we had said, look, we now can absolutely prove what happened and you're dead wrong. So the matter resolved, and the family was able to ultimately get all their bills paid and collect for damages and everything else. They felt that most important was to hold the company just accountable so that the company would do things differently. And we wrote in that case, into the agreement terms as to what the company would have to do differently going forward.